Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Monday, February 5th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Indiana game is in 208 days. The game against Michigan in 292 days. On Saturday, we took a look at the Ohio State offensive line, which is going to be a big question mark for what is this team going to look like coming this coming season. Today, we're looking at the other side of the trenches. One of the big questions on the defensive side of the ball is, how are they going to split all these guys up? You've lost a bunch of guys. You've got some new talent coming in. Jim Knowles is still sort of trying to set up his defense and get guys situated in different roles. So we're going to be taking a look at what might be the too deep right now for the Ohio State defensive line. And we're going to be doing that with Tony Gerdeman, who has decided very foolishly to try and figure out the too deep for the Ohio State football team and just constantly update it. We are still on update number 9 as we were on when we talked on Saturday. But, that theoretically could have changed between now and the time we actually get this show posted. But, Tony, this is something that, again, it feels like they've got a good, solid starting quarterback. This is not like the offensive line where it's just kind of like a whole bunch of question marks in a whole bunch of different spots. But on the defensive line, it feels like this is more, okay, you've got a bunch of good pieces. How do you want to sort of get those things lined up?
Yeah, and that's the problem with doing this, putting out a too deep, and then going and talking to the coaches, and the coaches are like, we'll figure it out. We don't know who's going to be where at this point. And I'm like, but have you seen my too deep? I've already put a too deep out. So if you would speak more confidently about where you see players, that would help how I feel about things. And let me propose this. What do you think about this? Well, we're still working some stuff out. So it is, as you said, this is an exercise in, it's not entirely guesswork because we know the players, but the backup strong side defensive end may be the backup weak side defensive end, that sort of thing. Like where I've got to put guys somewhere, and this makes some sense at this point, but it may not make all of the sense, and some of this may not make any sense. I'm okay with that. I'm not so bold to think that I might not be 100% correct in guessing the too deep of the Ohio State football team 7 months before they take the field.
I think people who've listened to your podcast over the years know you're never very bold on these. That's okay. We're just trying to take a sort of a look at where things stand right now. And where things stand right now, I think of all the things that you could put on there, you might be most confident about the starting strong side defensive end. It feels like that's going to be JT Tuimoloau almost no matter what. And then behind him, you've got Caden Curry. Those are two guys who you've heard so much good stuff about for so long. It would be very surprising if those were not two of the top 3 defensive ends one way or the other this year.
Yeah, and with Caden Curry, he's going to be the number 3 defensive end. So where do you want to put him? And really, when we'll talk about Jack Sawyer and the Jack, but when he's playing that Jack position, I wouldn't be surprised if JT Tuimoloau and Caden Curry are on the field together. Basically, Caden Curry is going to be on the field a lot this season. JT Tuimoloau, Jim Knowles said on Wednesday, he can do other things as well. Like if they need, they could try him as the Jack. But those two, again, JT Tuimoloau as the number 1 strong side, that's set in stone. That's what it was last year. That's what it will be presumably this year. But Caden Curry as that number 2 is, he's going to be number 2 somewhere, and he may be number 2 both places.
And, on the other side, at that other defensive end spot, Jack Sawyer feels like, again, a very safe name to sort of pencil in there as the starter on that weak side defensive end. And, I want to kind of separate the Jack position for a minute, because one of the things that Larry Johnson talked about this week is, that's kind of a separate thing. It's not that there's a strong side and a Jack. It's not there's a strong side and a weak side, and then the Jack is just also the weak side. That's a whole separate thing. So you have that broken out as a whole separate position. So we'll get to that in a minute. But in terms of the weak side defensive end, Jack Sawyer you've got as a starter. I think that's one that pretty much everyone would sort of have written in there as well. But behind him, you got Kenyatta Jackson, and that feels like one where you can kind of nod along and go, sure, that makes sense. But also it feels like you could also have other names in there as well and kind of go, oh yeah, that also makes sense.
Yeah, and you got to figure out who is ready for that this spring. Amari Abor is one of those guys. as well. And so Jack Sawyer obviously is the number one there, and that I don't think anybody's going to contend or contest that. But Kenyatta Jackson, talking to Larry Johnson about him in Atlanta, he's very high on him, spoke highly of his pass rush ability. So that's why I've got him there, just as a guy that just go get the pass rush, just go get the quarterback. Don't really worry about anything else. And I think maybe that's what you'll see from him. And this is going to be a big spring. This is his first spring. He was a summer enrollee last year, so this will be an opportunity. Again, how many reps are JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer going to get this spring? I think this is an opportunity for those young guys, the second-year guys, to really begin to take ownership and work their way into a rotation. Because right now, we believe Caden Curry will be part of that. We need to know if Kenyatta Jackson or Omari Abor are going to be part of that.
And then, so let's move on to the Jack position now. It was the story of the spring last year. It was the story of the summer. And then you saw it some, but it wasn't necessarily as big a story during the season as it was as we were sort of leading up to the season and figuring out all of the new and exciting things that came along with the Jim Knowles defense. Jack Sawyer played there a bunch last year, so you've got him there as a very logical next, first man up there. But the second guy is someone who we're not going to get to see this spring. We didn't get to see at all last year, but you still, Mitchell Melton is someone who feels like whenever he is actually back out there and on the field, he really probably will make some kind of a fairly significant impact this year.
Yeah, and the third guy I have mentioned is just JT Tuimoloau with a question mark, because it was just thrown out there by Jim Knowles. I don't know that I expect to see that too much, especially if Mitchell Melton is as good as Jim Knowles seems to think he is. And I'm sure everybody is rooting for him to be really, really good, because then that would allow Jack Sawyer to stay at defensive end more and just do that. And I think Larry Johnson would love for him to just be a defensive end and go get the quarterback. But that depends quite a bit on Mitchell Melton as well. And Jim Knowles loves to use this position. And if Jack Sawyer is the only guy that they can, then that limits a little bit of what they do. But if Mitchell Melton comes in, that gives them some more things they can do with the personnel. And, because I asked Jim Knowles, could you maybe see that, Jack, maybe can you pull somebody from the linebackers? And he said he didn't really see that, because I was thinking, can't you just use CJ Hicks in sort of a point and shoot type of thing, which is kind of some of what this Jack position is, because Jim Knowles has said he wants Jack Sawyer to play more reckless. So can anybody be reckless? And so, he's like, didn't really see that from the linebackers, but that's what he also said. The guy you need to watch is Mitchell Melton. And we already saw Tyleik Williams posting on social media some speed numbers from the Buckeyes, and Mitchell Melton's already pretty high up there, even though he's not full go yet in camp, or won't be full go in camp, won't be part of spring, certainly the contact portion. But it's interesting how much of this season may be riding, or how much of this defense may be riding on Mitchell Melton.
Yeah, he was someone who last spring you kept hearing great things about, and he was started playing in the spring game, and I think you saw maybe a couple interesting plays from him early on, and then he blows out his knee, and then he hasn't been back on the field since then. So whenever he's back, he's definitely going to be one of those kind of X-factor players for Ohio State for this year, and if they get a good season out of him, that's probably a pretty good sign. Now let's move to the interior of the defensive line. 2 spots there. You got the nose tackle, you got the 3-tech spot there, and this is one where you had sort of proposed a player shuffle where, one guy moves so you can get, your 2 best guys on the field, or kind of 2 most intriguing guys maybe on the field at the same time. And we talked about this a week or 2 back, and I was like, oh, that's an interesting idea. And you posed it to Larry Johnson, and it sounds like his answer was essentially like, yeah, that's an interesting idea. We'll see how it comes. We'll see how it works out.
Yeah, because last year Mike Hall and Ty Hamilton were your 2 nose tackles. Mike Hall was injured for the second half of the year, but Ty Hamilton took the job over and played well, and those 2 rotated a little bit. So my thought was, well, if those are your 2 most consistent guys and the 2 guys you can count on most, you need to separate them. And I think we all agree that Mike Hall can play 3-tech. He's quick enough, explosive enough, fast enough to play 3-tech where it's more pass rushing. And so, yes, I have separated those two. I've put Mike Hall at 3 tech, and then behind him, Tyleik Williams. But when I asked Larry Johnson about separating them, he said, "Yeah, we're gonna move guys around. We got to figure out all of the coach speak about. I don't even know who these guys are. I couldn't possibly tell you who's going to be starting it anywhere. Although Larry Johnson, after saying, not sure where Mike Hall will be, he certainly can play 3 tech and we'll figure things out. He did say he'll be starting somewhere. So that gives you a pretty good insight into how they feel about Mike Hall. Not that you needed any more, although the disappearance last year, he was injured, I think, quite a bit worse than maybe he let on or that OSU let on. And once healthy, I think they expect him to get back to the player he was at the first half of last season.
Well, yeah, you look back at the Michigan State game, was it, where he played, I think, 7 snaps and had 3 sacks. I mean, that is not a normal level of productivity. And, boy, if you prorate that over a whole game, Tony, even at 40 snaps or so, 18 sacks in a game would be, I believe, a school record for a season, not only for a game. Probably not a sustainable pace, but you never know. The other guy who's kind of interesting in that mix is Tyleik Williams because, Mike Hall, Ty Hamilton won the starting job at nose towards the end of last year and did a very solid job there. Mike Hall, you saw what you saw out of him. And then Tyleik Williams, the incredible athleticism. It feels like kind of any combination of those guys, you're probably going to be reasonably happy with the interior of that defensive line. And then the question is more, who else? Like, you've got your 3, but 3's not a whole lot of depth in the interior of the defensive line. So, who else fits in there? I mean, you had Hero Kanu at the backup at nose. Did you ask Larry at all about him?
I asked him about him in Atlanta, and I'm sure others have asked about him now. But it's we'll see. It's one of those things. We'll see where we need him, where we like him, where he can play. With this, I think this 4, and we'll see. Jaden McKenzie is a 4th-year guy now. Has played a lot of practiced a lot of 3 tech. Has not necessarily played all that much. Can he get in there? To me, this feels like maybe the most sensible 4. But it also shows the lack of depth, the lack of overall numbers at the position, which I think is a concern as well. But when we've discussed lineups and depth charts in the past before, and if this was the video game version, the EA Sports college football version, I think most Buckeye fans would be starting Mike Hall and Tyleik Williams side by side because those are your 2 most explosive players. And I agree, but the consistency with Tyleik Williams needs to be there. If it is as a junior, then if you have him at 3 tech and you keep Mike Hall at nose tackle, I think the potential is there for those 2 to be complete disruptors, but it's just potential at this point. I think they need to see some consistency. And if they see that consistency this spring from Tyleik Williams, then you could maybe see those 2 guys side by side. Ty Hamilton as the number 2 at nose tackle, which they'd feel very comfortable about, and a Hero Kanu or whomever as a 3 tech, and maybe not so much rotation on the interior, especially if they can maybe throw some rushman package and you only need 1 defensive tackle in there at a time, or even with the jack, you might only need 1 defensive tackle in there at a time. So they have some ways to kind of work around the lack of numbers. But I don't know when the last time they were this thin up front has been.
Yeah, and you wonder, do they come out of spring ball looking at someone in the portal? We talked about, if they come out of the spring a little unsure at left tackle or something like that, do they go into the portal for something like that? You wonder if they end up looking, even if it's for a rotation guy and in the interior of that defensive line, because it's a little thin this year. And I think just about all of the names we've said, other than Kenyatta Jackson and Caden Curry, just about all of those guys are potentially draft eligible after next year. So it could get real thin real quickly, depending on who ends up turning pro after next season. So that'll definitely be something to keep an eye on, but that is a next off-season storyline. We don't have to worry about that one just yet. There's plenty still to track this year. Tony is tracking all of this stuff on the huddle board at BuckeyeHuddle.com with his Too Deep tracker and, kind of ongoing Too Deep eye on the situation and what's going on in all these different positions. there's a lot of conversation around this because it's a really fun kind of thought exercise because you can move one person around and it can change a whole lot of stuff in a whole lot of spots. So you can find that at BuckeyeHuddle.com. You can also find all of our other great coverage, all of our recruiting coverage and X's and O's and team coverage there. You can also find us at youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. Kevin and Tony and I did a live episode of Buckeye Weekly there Friday afternoon. If you haven't watched that one yet, you can check that out. But we have lots of great content there. Player interviews, coaches, all that kind of stuff, all at youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.